The Switch 2 is finally here. No longer is it a console that I can see on my phone and computer screen, or something I hear about in stupid brain-dead internet rumors. It's a real, physical retail product that I own and I'm sitting right next to right now. Finally! Switch 1 never had a short supply of games, but the wait for this console felt so drawn out, and it's good to just have it. You know, it's just nice to finally have the thing. And now that I do have it, I have been playing it pretty constantly for the past 4 days, and I'm ready to give some actual thoughts on the thing. I think it's an extremely neat console. It's a long overdue upgrade from the Switch 1, is built wonderfully and plays all the games great. There is the obvious elephant in the room of pricing that I want to make my opinion on clear right now before we talk about anything relating to the console, just get it over with. The console itself at £400 is extremely well priced. That's only like an £100 jump from the Switch OLED, and compared to all of the PC handhelds like the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally and such, it is an extremely well priced handheld. The games being $80 is completely not on though. The Joy-Con 2 controllers being £75 also isn't on. I get that these games and controllers are more advanced than the stuff on the Switch 1, sure, but I just don't care, man, it's not on. Games and controllers are getting scarily close to the $100 price mark, and I don't think they should be at that point. It's just extremely greedy and hurts the consumer. I really don't have anything more to say beyond that. Okay, now that elephant in the room is out of the way, we've established that I'm not some insane Nintendo meat rider who thinks $80 Mario Kart is perfectly fine, because it isn't perfectly fine. We can now actually talk about the console, which, like I said earlier, I think is extremely cool. The build quality of this thing is absolutely beautiful. The buttons on the Joy-Cons, the triggers, everything feels like a massive step up from the Switch 1. The Switch 1, I think, is a really nice and elegant console, for sure. It's good. I'm not going to totally switch up and be like, bleh, it's awful, the second I need to glaze a new product. But that being said, the Switch 2 makes the Switch 1 feel like a Fisher-Price toy in comparison. In basically every aspect of the console, the Switch 2 is just built so much better. The analog sticks are bigger and more comfortable. The ZL-ZR triggers on the back of the Joy-Con are a giant improvement over the first ones. I'm really happy with the face buttons on this. I was really hoping that the Switch successor would go for the Switch Lite approach of having squishier buttons as opposed to clickier ones. Mainly just because I'd find myself with weird A-button shaped dents in my thumb after I play Mario Kart on a pair of Joy-Con 1s. They sadly didn't go for the squishy buttons, but to fix that issue they did increase the surface area of the buttons, making the clicky buttons feel a lot nicer to use. The SLSR buttons on the side of the Joy-Con are such a massive improvement from the dinky little terrible things on the first one. Single Joy-Con play is something people really didn't like doing on the first Switch that much because the Joy-Cons were very small, the bumpers on the side were tiny and uncomfortable, and it was generally just, like, it worked, it wasn't an ideal way to play at all. And whilst I still don't think it's an ideal way to play on the Switch 2, mainly because of you don't really have much space between the stick and the buttons, it is a massive improvement from the single Joy-Con play experience on the Switch 1. The bigger size and the improved SLSR buttons do so much to enhance that experience. And speaking of size, one of the big things I was concerned about going into the Switch 2 generation would be the actual size of the unit itself. Handhelds in the past decade or so have been increasingly getting bigger and less portable. Which, as someone whose first console was a DSi, which seems microscopic in comparison, I took issue with. I saw that the screen was going to be as big as it was, I saw how giant the current bulky PC handhelds are, and I got a little worried about the portability of this thing. In practice, it's not what I wanted. Straight up, it is bigger than I would want a portable to be. But I kind of really like it anyways. See, what separates this from something like the Steam Deck is the fact that yes, it is quite big, but it is extremely thin and sleek. Nintendo made a big point of the fact that the Switch 2 is the exact same thickness as the Switch 1, and I think that was one of the best manufacturing decisions they possibly could have made whilst building it. The best way I would describe it is that the Switch 1 is, you know, another good Nintendo handheld. The Switch 2 is an iPad that I can play all my favorite games on whilst I'm dropping a dump. It's amazing. I'm surprised by just how much I like the build of this thing. And another great improvement over the Switch 1 this thing has is the Joy-Con and the way they attach. The Joy-Con 1 on the Switch were very prone to wiggling issues. You know, when you held the thing in your hands, you could tell it was a tablet with two controllers bolted onto the side of it. It did not feel particularly stable at all, and whilst the Joy-Con wiggle hasn't been entirely eliminated on the Switch 2, it is leaps and bounds better than the Switch 1. We are much closer to that Switch-like kind of feeling of having one complete comprehensive unit. The magnetic Joy-Cons are just cool. I really don't have much more to say about it beyond that, it's just a really cool feature. The Joy-Con mouse, I think, is also a massive win. The number one thing keyboard and mouse has always had on controllers is the precision you get when aiming in shooter games and such. And the Joy-Con mouse is a really valiant attempt at closing the gap between keyboard and mouse and controller a bit. And sadly, there aren't really many games we can test this feature out on yet. Fortnite hasn't got mouse support yet. Metroid Prime 4 isn't going to be out until God knows when. But I did try the feature out on Cyberpunk, and it played really well. What experience I do have with the Joy-Con mouse so far has been extremely good, and I'm excited to see what they do with this feature going down the console's lifespan. The screen on this console is fantastic. It is not as good as an OLED screen. No LCD screen ever will be. But unlike the Switch one, this is an extremely good, vivid, beautiful looking LCD. So beyond not having true blacks anymore, you really haven't lost too much when you're making the jump from a Switch OLED to a Switch 2. I do miss true blacks though. I miss them a lot. Still a really great screen though. The Pro Controller for me was a massive unexpected upgrade from the Switch 1. Once again, this is not me going and doing some revisionist, oh well the Switch 1 stuff always sucks stuff to prop up the Switch 2. The Switch 1 had a fantastic Pro Controller. I love the Switch 1's Pro Controller. That being said, the Switch 2 one is a giant upgrade. It's very hard to really describe why exactly that is without just holding it in person and playing around with it for yourself. It's a lot like the jump from the original Switch to the Switch OLED in that way. So if I can compare one specific aspect of the controller to try and convey this, I'm gonna compare the sticks. On a lot of standard video game controllers, when you flick the stick around, you're met with this plastic clacking sensation as the stick hits the edge of the controller's shell. Standard stuff, nothing at all wrong with it, entirely manageable for the past 8 years. Now let's see how the new controller sounds when you do this. It almost feels kind of rubberized. I'm not exactly sure what language to use for this, but it does feel so much nicer than the first controller. And I have similar feelings towards the face buttons and triggers and stuff. It is just a much nicer controller in terms of build quality. I do prefer the transparent look of the first controller though. I was really pleasantly surprised by game chat. Given the history of Switch Online being kind of awkward and buggy and just randomly deciding not to work, I was expecting this to be a pretty underbaked feature. But no, I've done a couple multi-hour voice calls on this thing and it just kinda works. The built-in microphone to the Switch 2 is really great, with some fantastic noise suppression. The video streaming works about as well as you would expect for video streaming. The size of the screen can be customized. This was something a lot of people were unclear on, even though they showed it in the trailer, which is weird, but my only issue is the fact that it is going to be a paywalled feature. I really don't think voice chat on consoles should be paywalled. But like, hey, paywalled voice chat, as bad as it is really nothing new for the console market. Still not an excuse for Nintendo to do it though. Apart from that though, game chat has been a surprisingly great feature. I've been enjoying it a lot. By the way, I absolutely nailed my prediction for what the C button was going to be. The C button. My personal massive pipe dream hope for this button is that C stands for chat. And speaking of things that I was really spot on with my predictions, backwards compatibility. My personal doomsday scenario here is that the most performance upgrades you'll see without shelling out any money is Zelda going from an unstable 30 FPS on Switch 1 to a stable 30 FPS on Switch 2. I'm kinda worried these games will perform more or less the same. And that if you want to play these games in 60 FPS at better resolutions, you're gonna have to shell out money. And in this doomsday scenario, just go with me here, I think they're either going to charge for this by either A, charging £5 to £10 for patches for these games that improve them, or B, they're just gonna sell full-on remasters for the games. And they'll drip feed them as well. They'll drip feed them for Nintendo Direct hype moments. I guarantee it, man. You know, like they did for the retro games on the Switch 1, which realistically should have all been on the console on day one. It is scary how right I was there. Even with my two scenarios where they'd either sell patches or sell remasters, they did both. Yeah, Switch 2's backwards compatibility sadly has not hit the industry standard that Xbox set by providing free resolution and frame rate bumps for all of their games. That being said though, it's not bad or anything. The games that did receive attention from Nintendo, like the Switch 2 editions and the free Switch 1 upgrades, like Mario Odyssey, Bowser's Fury, Breath of the Wild, blah blah blah, all look incredible on the new console. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom especially benefit so hard from the resolution and frame rate boost. By the way, it's time for a quick shameless self-promo. I recently published a big opinion piece about Tears of the Kingdom, and if that interests you at all, there'll be a link in the description. As I've been replaying Breath of the Wild, I've noticed so much detail in that game that was just not visible at all in the original Switch 1 version. It is such an upgrade. That being said though, you've still got games like Mario & Luigi Brothership and Age of Calamity that they run better. Their previous bonkers, inconsistent resolution and 30 FPS now all run stably and consistently with much better loading times, which is great. You know, there are no more performance issues with these games, but they are still tuned for the limits of the Switch One. And I think that's extremely unfortunate, especially given that we've heard nothing about when these games are getting those performance boosts. Well, that is until Nintendo wheels these games out for another Nintendo Direct hype moment, that is. Whenever that happens. That being said, I am still happy with backwards compatibility on the Switch 2 from what I've played. The games that did receive attention from Nintendo are absolutely drop-dead gorgeous on this new hardware, and the games that didn't still do benefit from the backwards compatibility. I think Nintendo could have and should have had more to offer with this out of the gate on day one, but I am still happy with the back compat. I think it is a worthy selling point for the console. Enough talking about old shit though. What do I think of Mario Kart World? Last time I talked about this game on the channel, I was quite critical of how the graphics looked in the first Nintendo Switch 2 reveal trailer. And now that I've actually had time to sit down with the game, I am glad to tell you that I am way more impressed with this game's visuals. It makes 8 look quite stilted in comparison with its gorgeous expressive animation. This is a game that just absolutely oozes charm and just feels really great to play. I love the new Knockout Tour mode, what they did with Grand Prix was cool. The open world is a bit barren, but I like just screwing around in it every now and then between races. Also, oh my god, the music in this game is fantastic, dude! I've been playing soundtracks from this game in the background for this whole video. I love the music in this game so much. Every other minute of playing it, I discover another 11 out of 10 track. It is brilliant. But yeah, Mario Kart World, definitely not worth the $80 asking price, although that's because I don't think any game is worth $80. It is a fantastic game so far, and I'm really happy to have picked it up in the bundle with the console. Although, I do think the Switch 2 should have had a second launch title. Mario Kart is a fantastic game, I love Mario Kart to death, but Mario Kart I do not think is enough to carry a console launch. Especially when you compare it to previous Nintendo launch titles like Breath of the Wild or Mario 64. Mario Kart to me is that game that you play in between big sessions of the big innovative single player game Nintendo has pushed out. And with the Switch 2 launch, that game just doesn't exist. I'm hoping Donkey Kong ends up filling that role. I'm gonna be looking at reviews of that and maybe buying it depending on how it's received. But, even if they just moved Donkey Kong Bonanza up to launch day along with Mario Kart, I think they would have had a much stronger launch. The launch hasn't been bad or anything, I just think it's missing that big mind-boggling single-player title. Mario Kart World does slap though, and it's definitely worth playing if you're interested in it. Despite my criticisms in this video of the backwards compatibility and the launch lineup and stuff, I am extremely satisfied with my Switch 2. I've been itching for a Nintendo Switch that runs the games better for so long now, and it is great to finally have that product in my hands and actually use and enjoy it. There are definitely a lot of blemishes on this thing that a lot of people will be completely put off by, like the pricing and stuff, and I think that is entirely fair. But it's a great console. I think it's a really great console so far, and if you want one, I recommend picking one up. Mario Kart World is great, it's got access to the incredible backlog of Nintendo Switch games. That cool looking Donkey Kong game is a month away, and I'm sure future games will be in no short supply. I've been really enjoying my Nintendo Switch 2 so far, and I'm really excited to see what Nintendo and third-party developers do with it in the future.